Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This morning we are going to focus our study on the seventh day Sabbath. And this study involves certain very important understanding. We never took to share what we have understood about the Sabbath till now, because I felt and we felt that there was a certain line of study that has to be understood before we could realize the profound spiritual and deep spiritual significance of the Sabbath. And last Sabbath study, I believe, was extremely important for us to understand, to realize why this Sabbath study is so important. If we have missed last week's study, it might be a bit difficult, and if you need to ask any questions to help us to understand this even the way it should, we'll be prepared to share it with you. And we are going to just recap a little bit of what we talked about last Sabbath, and that we will do in a little while. For now, I want us to focus at Genesis chapter 1, verses 31 to Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. So we are going to look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 31 to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 2.
Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done.
So when we look at verse 31 of chapter 1, it reads, Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. What we should look at in this verse is everything was very good. Prior to this, it was stated everything was good. But here now, and I believe Jesus is the creator, it's being stated that everything was very good, which means to say everything that Jesus completed in these 6 days of creation, he has made it very clear that it was very good. And then comes the evening and the morning. Now we look at chapter 2 and verse 1. And when it states, Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. I want us to pay particular attention to verse 1 of chapter 2. So when it says, Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. On what day was all of this finished? We must grasp the significance of what is being stated here. On what day were all this work finished? Looking at verse 131 again, and chapter 2, verse 1, it was finished on the sixth day. So all of God's creative work, which was very good, was finished at the end of the sixth day. Then we look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done. God rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. What does God do to this seventh day that he did not do in any other day. Extremely important. What does God do on this particular seventh day that he did not do in any other day? In Genesis 2, chapter 3, then God blessed the seventh day.
Verse 3.
Pardon?
Genesis 2, verse 3.
Verse 3, sorry. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So what we are being told here in verse 2, he blessed and sanctified the seventh day, because in it, in the seventh day, he rested from all his work which God had created and made. My question, on this seventh day, what is left out on this seventh day compared to the other 6 days?
John?
Go ahead, John.
Any work.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, he didn't sanctify or hallow any other day except the seventh day.
Okay. Very true. There is something that is missing on this seventh day that is in all the other 6 days.
Evening and morning.
Evening and morning is missing on this seventh day. And to understand the reason why this evening is and morning is not in the seventh day, I want us now to make sure that we understand this properly. We were going to look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
So here, it's very clearly delineated that there was darkness and then there was light. Okay? In verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So you had the darkness first, then came the light, and God, and verse 4, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So there is a separation that God has made between the light and darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. For us to make sure that we have understood this properly, there's 2 reasons why certain thing is stated about the seventh day that is extremely important. One is, we have just covered it in chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. And again, I'm emphasizing that light and darkness is clearly stating of evening and morning, and also it is telling us that that was day and night. So those things are clearly delineated in those verses. So what has this light and darkness got to do with every day? I believe in the context of the rebellion that Lucifer introduced into the universe, something is laid out right here in the beginning that tells us, and it's something might be very difficult for us to accept or understand. If darkness represents, and we're going to look at a few other verses to make sure this is understood properly, if darkness represents Satan's system, Satan's domain, And light reflects God and His domain and His system. So you got this light and darkness right here, but there was darkness before the light came. What I understand from all what we are looking at, that there was equal access given here. God and Satan both had equal access. And I hope we can understand the depth and profoundness of this, because the God of agape love, if He has that kind of a love, then He gave Lucifer equal access running through in this garden narrative. And we will see next week, and will be the climax of this line of study, next week when we look at the two trees, we will see the significance of what is being stated here. So this light and darkness represented God and Satan and Lucifer. With that in mind, I want us to look at a few verses. The first verse that we have looked at was Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. Now I want us to turn to John chapter 8. And we have looked at this before, yes, the last Sabbath, but I want us to look at it again to emphasize what is involved. And that is John chapter 8 and verse 12.
Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life.
So what is Jesus trying to tell here? He has just taken care of what was mandated that should have happened to the adulterous woman. And he's talking to religious people, and he tells them that that is not the way I am going to deal with this situation. And then he turns around and tells them, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So if we are following Jesus Christ and not deviating from all of His teachings and revelation, then we will not walk in darkness. And I want us to look at a couple of more passages. 1 John chapter 1. And like I said, we covered this last Sabbath, but I want to make sure that we've got it so that as we look at what we are going to be discussing in the light of the seventh day, it is understood properly. So we'll look at 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 to 7. 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 to 7.
This is the message which we have heard from Him and declare to you, that God is light, and in Him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with Him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, His Son, cleanses us from all sin. If we say that we have no... Is that it? That's it.
Okay, so here, what John is writing, again, in connection with Jesus, he's clearly telling us that this is the message which we heard from Jesus Christ. John is stating, and declare to you. So what John heard from Jesus Christ now is declaring to everyone in his time, and now the same has application to us, that God is light. And in God, there is no darkness at all. And we are going to see how this is covered. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5, we've seen that, and we're going to see how it applies to the Sabbath. Next verse we want to look at is 1 John chapter 2, verses 8 to 11. These verses now we are going to look at. John chapter 2, verses 1 John chapter 2, verses 8 to 11.
Again, a new commandment I write to you, which thing is true in Him and in you, because the darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining. He who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness until now. He who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. But he who hates his brother is in darkness and walks in darkness, and does not know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes.
Okay, paying attention again to verse 8. And a new commandment I write to you. And which in a way wasn't any new commandment, but he's stating to emphasize what he's trying to promote. Because the darkness, I'm writing which thing is true in him and in you, which is true in Jesus Christ and in us. Because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. So the darkness that is passing away, only way that darkness will pass away when we are focused on the true light. And that true light is the person of Jesus Christ. So we cannot be removed from the darkness until we are following and listening to what Jesus Christ taught. With that in mind, now I want us to look at Genesis chapter 2 and verse 4.
This is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens.
Okay, again looking at verse 4 of chapter 2. This is the history. That word in the if we go back and look at the original Hebrew, that word was generations. And if you do the check, you will find that it was the generation. So this is the generations, plural, of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the heavens and the earth.
I'm looking at the Hebrew word. It's toledot. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it says in the plural, it is used to denote the chronological procession of history as humans shape it.
See,
It refers to the successive generations in one family. Okay?
So what it is telling us, the generations or the history is laid out from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, all the way down to verse 4 here. The whole history encapsulated in these 7 days is the whole history of the 7,000 years. And we will see why that is so important. If we look at Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20, and we will see why this is important, the seventh day, and why it covers the whole history of the 7,000 years. So Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 to verse 3.
Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, so that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while.
So what we are looking at here in Revelation chapter 20 and what we looked at from verses 1 to 3 is tied up with what? The 7th day of creation week. The millennium is tied up with that 7th day. That is the generations or the history all the way from creation week to the end of the 7,000 years. The whole process is covered. So when in the millennium, the 7,000 year, Satan is clearly told us, okay, that he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and he cast him to the bottomless pit and shut him up. In verse 3, and set a seal on him, so that he should not deceive the nations. I'm repeating this again. So that he, the devil, should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. So he cannot deceive any person during those 1,000 years. So if we look at the seventh day Sabbath and understand the significance of the seventh day Sabbath, that there was no evening or morning on that day, it has application to the millennium, but it also has its local application. And the local application is this, that there is no form of darkness on the seventh day. The seventh day, if we understand the way the seventh day should be understood, and that's why I believe the devil has done a mighty work in trying to show people that are not worshiping on the Sabbath, that the Sabbath was not created in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. That the Sabbath was given to the Jewish people, and that's when the seventh day Sabbath really began. We are going to see the fallacy of that understanding. And the reason I believe that we are not to understand the Sabbath the way it should be understood is covered again we're going to look at two passages for now. I want us to turn to Exodus chapter 16 first. Exodus chapter 16 verses 21 to 27.
So they gathered, 16:21?
Exodus chapter 16 verses 21 to verse 27.
Okay, so it's talking about the manna here. So they gathered it every morning, the manna, every man according to his need. And when the sun became hot, it melted. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." So they laid it up till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Now it happened that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none.
Okay, so I want us to look at verse 24. And in verse 24 it says, "So they laid it up till morning, as Moses commanded, and did not stink, nor were there any worms in it." So when they were obedient and did exactly what God had asked them to do, to collect a double portion on the 6th day, that manna did not get affected in the least. But when they disobeyed what God had commanded and did not follow and obey the significance of that 6th day and the 7th day, that manna stank, which means to say that was not the person of Jesus Christ that was involved, because nothing from Jesus, and he's the manna, can ever be contaminated. That's why there was no sin in the person of Jesus Christ. So if we grasp the significance of that 7th day, the way it should be understood, and we are living here now at this time period of what? The double portion of manna. We're at the 6th day. We are going into the 7th and the millennium. And if we are focused on the person of Jesus Christ, we are going to get an understanding of that manna, who is the person of Jesus Christ and no one else, in a way that no previous generation ever had. Extremely important to grasp the significance of that. And also this proves in Exodus chapter 16 that the Sabbath was already established before it was given in the Ten Commandments. So any person that claims that the Sabbath was not given till Exodus 20, when God gave the commandment, are wrong, because the Sabbath was already operating before the Exodus 20. Exodus 16 confirms it, which means to say it was right there from creation week. One verse that in chapter 16 must be looked at, and we are going to look at that verse now. Exodus 16 and verse 15.
So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat."
Applying this again to the Sabbath and paying particular attention to verse 15. So when the children of Israel saw the manna, and the manna was a representation of who? The person of Jesus Christ. When the children of Israel saw the manna, they said to another, "What is it?" Okay, the question, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." How that can apply to us if we have not understood the significance of the Sabbath? Then this is exactly what we would be doing. We would be looking at the person of Jesus Christ and not understanding his mission, everything he gave and portrayed throughout his ministry. We will totally miss it, and what we will turn around and say, "What is it?" Or what it was. You see what I'm trying to bring across? That the person of Jesus Christ is so important that if we aren't focused in him, then this is what we are going to say. What is it? Like, what's the big deal? Who is this person? If we understand Jesus the way he should be understood, we will never think that way. And we are going to look now at Exodus 20. Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
So here we are spoken right clear, right at the beginning of the Sabbath. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Why would God here in the 10 Commandments that is being given to the children of Israel, and is telling them to remember the Sabbath day? Why would he ask them to remember? You know why? Because they had completely lost sight of the Sabbath. So he's saying, remember the Sabbath day, which means to say what? You go right back to where? To Genesis. That's what this verse is telling us, that you're going to remember the Sabbath because it goes right back to Genesis, not given here now. And every person that is promoting this in the Christian world that is promoting that the Sabbath was given only to the Jews are totally wrong. And we are going to look at that, how Jesus himself is going to tell us who the Sabbath was given to. Okay? So it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, how are we going to keep the Sabbath day holy? And God here now tells us how we are going to keep the Sabbath holy. Look, the people in Jesus' time, and even going all the way back to when the Sabbath command was given, they had made it such an onerous and such a heavy weight on themselves by trying to think how you are going to keep the Sabbath holy. And they totally missed the significance of why the Sabbath was to be kept as a holy day. The Bible itself tells us here clearly now, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. What does it mean for 6 days for us to do all of our labor and work? We're going to cover this next week, but I want us to look at it here now. The moment Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they went into the domain of working what? In labor. By the sweat of their brow. That's what ended up happening. So they were to labor these 6 days. And here, what we are told, 6 days you shall labor and do your work. So this is already laid out. We are going to be doing these things on the 6 days. We are going to be laboring and doing this. But, he says here in verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. So how we are going to keep it holy is here. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. And we're going to look, like I said, we are laying the foundation here, but next Sabbath, we are going to cover what all this means. You shall do no work, you, nor your sons, nor your daughters, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. And I hope and pray that we don't look at this with a legalistic mind and think that this is what it means. Verse 11 is totally tied up with why the Sabbath is to be kept holy. Verse 11, for in 6 days, here in Exodus now we are told why the Sabbath was given and why we are to keep it holy. He says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it. That particular day, no other day was blessed and hallowed except that one day. And why was that one day blessed and hallowed? Always to remember and never ever to forget what? That God is the Creator. That God is the Creator. And if every human being came to know God as the Creator, we would not have the problems we are having. And Satan did a number in the garden so that we will not remember that God is the Creator. And what has ended up happening? We have desecrated that particular day that was hallowed, sanctified, and blessed. For this reason, that we will never ever forget, doesn't matter whatever happens, that God, this God of love, in love, amen, He created everything He did, and in love, He gave it to Adam and Eve. That was His agape love. He gave it to Adam and Eve to have dominion over it. And when they disobeyed God, the first command that God gave in the garden, that was the first command. When they disobeyed that first command, they opened the door for Satan to take dominion over this earth. And this is why this 7th day is so important. With that in mind, I want us to look at Mark chapter 2 before we go to something that I think is extremely important in the light of understanding God as the Creator, and why it is so important that the Sabbath is to be kept holy. And we cannot keep the Sabbath holy unless we realize that God is the Creator. With that in mind, I want us to look at Mark chapter 2, verses 27 and 28.
And he, Jesus, said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath.
So what Jesus is stating here, and whenever we might be speaking from here, dear ones, and if we don't clearly, sometimes everything is just stated in the masculine, and the feminine is not given. Please, if we fail to bring that to your attention, it doesn't mean in any way that it does not apply across the board to both men and women. I hope that we clarify this in no uncertain terms. So when Jesus turns around and says, the Sabbath was made for man, that is mankind, not just man, but the Sabbath was made totally for mankind, and mankind was not made for the Sabbath. How do we know that? Because first, Adam and Eve were created first. After they were created, then they were given the Sabbath. So, the Sabbath was made for mankind, and not mankind for the Sabbath. Which means to say that Adam and Eve weren't created after the Sabbath. They were created before the Sabbath. Then, in verse 28, therefore, Jesus Christ now, and he's talking, therefore the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus Christ is the Lord of the Sabbath. And if we are not believing and accepting what the Bible has taught and is teaching us, and what we have done here, believe me, dear ones, is such a concise understanding of the Sabbath, so concise that if we could spend a whole day studying this, we still would not cover all what needs to be covered to prove how important the Sabbath is. Okay? So here, Jesus is telling clearly that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. So if I am not listening to who? To Jesus Christ and all what he has taught, and I'm a Sabbath keeper, what does that mean? I'm not following the Lord of the Sabbath. I must understand the significance of the Sabbath. With that in mind, I want us to go to Isaiah. With that in mind, we are going to look at a couple of more passages. Isaiah chapter 14, and we are going to look at verses 12 to 17. With that in mind, all of us have been exposed to what has just happened in the southern states of the United States. Not all of the southern states. Major damage was done in Florida. Okay? And we must keep this in mind. Those of us that have seen the thing on television, we have seen the kind of devastation that has happened. It's like this whole thing went into a war zone. With that in mind, I want us now to keep that in mind. What we have just observed in these last few days that happened in Florida and a few other states. With that in mind, I want us to look at Isaiah 14, verses 12 to 17.
How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north.
What I'll do is, instead of me going back to it as Denise reads, I'm going to clarify certain things. In verse 12, when it says, you who weaken the nations, okay? Lucifer is being addressed here, that you, Lucifer, are the one that has weakened the nations. And then he shows us, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. When he's saying, I will exalt my throne, Lucifer, exalt my throne above the stars of God, he's not saying that he's going to go above God. What he's saying, that he's going to exalt his throne above the stars of God. And if you go to the Bible, the stars of God were angels. Okay? So he's saying, I will exalt my throne above all those created angels. I will be like the Most High. Okay? Go ahead, verse 14.
I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and clouds also are a symbol in the Bible for angels. I will be like the Most High.
So here, what he's saying, that what he's introducing and what he is doing, he's going to be at the same level as God himself. I will be like the God Most High. I will be exactly like God. He's not saying he's going to be above God. I'll be exactly like God. I will be above all other created beings in the universe that were all the angels. He was going to be above them. Okay?
Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit.
So what that means is, because of the kind of mentality he had, eventually during the millennium we have seen and we read what will end up happening to him. Now we go to what is extremely important to pay attention to.
Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? How far?
That should be enough.
Okay.
Okay. So what we are looking at here is particular attention must be paid to this. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? If we understand the Sabbath and why there was no evening and morning in the Sabbath, which means to say Satan had no access whatsoever to that seventh day. If Satan had no access to that seventh day, there is no darkness in that seventh day. And the Bible clearly says in God there is no darkness at all. Okay? So on this seventh day, God is clearly given and portrayed as the what? The Creator. And here we read in Isaiah what has happened and what has happened in Florida. Christians will turn around and say God did all of that there to punish all the evil people, or whatever they'll come up with. And we discussed this a bit in the Sabbath class. We have to be extremely, extremely careful that we do not attribute to God things that have nothing to do with the Creator God of the universe, the Creator God of our earth, and the significance of that seventh day. With that in mind, let's look at the last passage that I want us to look at. Is John chapter 10. John chapter 10 and verse 10.
The thief does not come except to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly.
See how clear Jesus is here? And he's talking to the religious people, and he's telling them, the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. And what has happened there in the United States in these last few days was the work of who? The destroyer. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. And what does Jesus say? I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. The seventh-day Sabbath is teaching us that Jesus is the Creator And he has come to give us life and to give us life more abundantly. The thief has come to do only one thing: to lie, to steal, to kill, to destroy. And again, Jesus made that very clear in John 8:44. Two people that had believed in him. People that had believed in Jesus, he turned around and told them, "You are of your father, the devil." And if you think I'm making this up, in John chapter 8, if you look at verse 30 and 31, and then look at verse 44, Jesus is talking to believers in him. But they had not understood the significance of the Sabbath. So he turns around and tells them, "You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it." The seventh-day Sabbath was established for us to remember and never to forget that Jesus Christ is the Creator, and he has come to give us life and to give us life more abundantly. The devil has come to destroy, to kill, to lie, to murder. That's his role. And I hope and pray that as we proceed with the next week's study, we will see the significance of what we have looked at so far. With that in mind, can I ask one of the ladies to pray for us? Sister Saunders, can you pray for us?
Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We have heard your word. And Father, may it be applied to our hearts in a way, dear God, in Jesus' name, that you would have us to understand your word and the loving kindness that is thy word, to help us to be more vessels of honor for thee, and to rightly divide thy word of truth in the way that be a blessing to people, and that they will be willing to follow thee all the way, and to walk down that road that you gave us to walk on, dear Father. And may we forever praise your holy name, in Jesus' name, for your word. And we thank you, Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.